Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating essay by an author named Feng. We're going to look at how a completely mundane, everyday kitchen mishap, the kind of accidental science experiment we've all been guilty of leaving at the back of the pantry, can actually be expanded into a massive thesis on human society, religion, and literally the universe itself. It's a brilliant example of how observing the tiniest details in our physical world can unlock some incredibly deep philosophical ideas. The essay has this great provocative title, Life Rots and Stinks Like This. And together, we're going to trace what we'll call the expanding circle of isolation.
Okay, so let's dive right into this mystery. The author opens with a highly relatable scenario. Picture this. It's July 2004, he's making dinner for his family, goes to fry up some eggplant, and reaches for some garlic he had stored in a plastic bag in the storage room. But when he opens the bag and breaks open a clove, it is completely black, just utterly, disgustingly rotten. He empties the whole bag out, and not a single clove is spared. Now, this begs an immediate question, right? Why on earth did a fresh bag of garlic rot in just one single month when normally garlic can just sit around your kitchen in a basket for months on end without going bad at all?
While seeing this completely ruined garlic actually triggers a vivid memory for the author. He remembers this summer business trip where he washed his face one morning and, without really thinking about it, just tossed his damp, warm towel right into a plastic bag. He completely forgot to take it out that day. When he finally grabbed it the next morning to wash his face again and gave it a gentle twist, the towel literally snapped in half. The sweltering summer heat, combined with the moisture trapped inside that perfectly sealed plastic bag, meant the towel had absolutely zero contact with external air. Those trapped stale gases actively degraded the fabric, completely destroying its strength overnight.
And this brilliantly illustrates the author's core physical rule. Compare the garlic trapped in a plastic bag to garlic sitting openly in a woven basket. The fundamental difference here? Circulation. The garlic in the bag is completely isolated. Because it's unable to interact with the external air, it inevitably decays and stinks. But on the flip side, the garlic in the basket gets this constant, steady flow of air which allows it to remain fresh and totally viable for months. So Feng concludes from this simple everyday contrast that all material things, if they are confined with open circulation and denied contact with the outside world, will absolutely inevitably rot.
Now, here is where we hit a fascinating pivot in the essay. The author establishes this clear physical law of decay, and then he challenges us to apply it to the invisible world. Think about it. If material things act this way, if they rot and blacken and break down when they're sealed off from the outside, does the exact same physical rule apply to the non-material world? Do abstract concepts, social structures, and even human minds rot when they're placed in their own metaphorical plastic bags?
Feng systematically argues that yes, this principle of isolation applies to literally every single level of human organization. Let's look at the steps. Think about a family that only allows internal marriages and flatly refuses to intermingle with outside families. Biologically and socially, they will inevitably perish after a few generations. Zoom out further to a nation. A nation that confines itself to a singular cultural circle without ever interacting with other cultures will eventually decay from within. Zoom out even further to the global stage. A country that aggressively closes its borders to international exchange and new ideas will surely decline. The absolute lack of fresh input essentially guarantees their destruction.
But crucially, this plastic bag metaphor loops right back down to the individual, to you and me. If you refuse to learn from others, if you avoid open communication and keep your mental windows firmly shut, well, you're putting your own mind into a sealed bag. Feng argues the result is a very recognizable kind of psychological rot. Over time, an isolated mind suffers from severe prejudice, a hardened stubbornness, and deep ideological stagnation. Without the fresh air of new perspectives, this ultimately leads to a state of mental decay, intellectual stagnation, and, metaphorically speaking, death.
The author then boldly takes this framework and applies it to religious groups. He notes that historically, some disappearing religions have actually attributed their own decline to self-righteousness and arrogance. Feng suggests that if major belief systems, and this applies regardless of which one we're talking about, hold on to an attitude of absolute superiority and refuse mutual exchange with others, they're essentially cutting themselves off from external air. In his view, a religion that isolates itself from outside perspectives and refuses to evolve through open conversation is going to suffer the exact same fate as the garlic in the pantry. It rots.
So, having scaled this metaphor from a single smelly clove of garlic all the way up to global religions and entire nations, the essay poses a massive fundamental question. To solve this escalating problem of isolation, we really have to ask, How can human life itself prevent this rot and stench? If isolation is the ultimate enemy of preservation, what are the actual practical mechanics required to keep human existence fresh, vibrant, and alive on a grand scale? To answer that question, Zhu defines human existence as a duality. It's composed of two distinct parts that both absolutely require constant, open circulation to survive. First, you have the material body, which we all intuitively understand needs continuous physical exchange with the world around it. But then you also have the spiritual soul, which, in his view, requires a completely different type of external connection to stay alive and avoid that stagnation. Here is exactly how that duality functions in his framework. Just as the physical material body must constantly exchange air, water, and energy with the external environment to avoid physical death and decay, the spiritual soul has its own required environment. According to Zhu, the soul must stay connected to the divine source of the universe, which he refers to as the greatest creator. If the soul puts itself in a spiritual plastic bag and cuts off that specific divine circulation, it suffers spiritual decay and ultimately dies, exactly like a physical body would without oxygen.
And finally, we end by taking this rotting garlic metaphor to the absolute edges of the cosmos. If individuals, nations, religions, and our very souls require external connection to survive, what about our entire planet? The author leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative thought. If life on Earth chooses to act like a closed system, sealing itself off and refusing to engage in spiritual communication and contact with life forms beyond our world, will humanity as a whole simply rot, stink, and perish in the dark? It is a massive leap from a kitchen counter to the universe, but it absolutely leaves you rethinking the importance of keeping your mind and your world completely open.